Well, good morning. Welcome to the branch. As people continue to come in, and if you're joining us online, thanks for doing that. As we start just reading from the Psalms, David wrote, Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You've set your glory in the heavens. And so as we worship this morning, let's stand and sing about the hope of the world, that is Jesus. For the love poured out for the price of freedom. Let the whole earth sing, hear the praises rising. We stand in awe of what you've done for us. At the cross, the hope of the world, lifted on high, calling us home with arms out wide. To know you forever, love you forever. You are our everything. Our sin erased, we are forgiven. You made a way, you were our ransom. We owe this life for all you've done for us. At the cross, the hope of the world, lifted on high, calling us home with arms out wide. To know you forever, love you forever, you are our everything. The hope of the world, lifted on high, calling us home with arms out wide. To know you forever, love you forever, you are our everything. And all we need is you. All we need is you. And all we need is you. All we need is you. The hope of the world, lifted on high, calling us home with arms out wide. To know you forever, love you forever, you are our everything. The hope of the world, lifted on high, calling us home with arms out wide. To know you forever, love you forever, you are our everything. To know you forever, love you forever, you are our everything. To know you forever, love you forever, you are our everything. As we just come together, I mean, one of the things that I have to remind myself over and over again is that, sometimes the things that we don't want to do are the things that we need to do the most, right? And there's something that happens when the body of Christ comes together, and that we can't get from just sitting home and watching in our pajamas and stuff, but there's a beauty, I think, in seeing the diversity of the body of Christ coming together and knowing that we're all working together for God's kingdom work in this world. And I need to stop myself, especially this fall. It has felt so frenetic to me, the pace at which I'm running, even when I try so hard to slow things down. And I need to stop. I need to take a step back. And even as as the beauty of God's earth just enhances with the leaves and everything during this time. And just remember of the goodness of God. And, there's a verse in the Bible that says, and you will see the goodness of God in this lifetime. And I think some of us may be looking for God's goodness in places where it's hard to find, but are we seeing God's goodness around us? Are we seeing it in our children? Are we seeing it in God's creation? Are we seeing it in the ways that God's working? And can we sing of that goodness of God? I think sometimes I have a tendency to complicate things and to make it seem like, oh, okay, it must be something more complex than this. My mind tries to make it something that it's not. And yet the simple truths of God are simple. It's like that, and we just need to sing of that. So that's what this song is about. So we sing of the goodness of God. I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. The moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your voice, you have led me through the fire in darkest nights. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father, I've known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. Every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness, Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down and surrendered now, I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after me. My life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God. Pray with me. God our Father, we thank you for the goodness that you show us every day. God, we thank you for the ways that you have been faithful to us, even when we have been faithless and we have been unfaithful to you. God, we thank you for your mercy. We thank you for your grace. We thank you that it meets us wherever we are, God, but it doesn't leave us there. And we thank you for your goodness that doesn't just stay put, but Father, that runs after us, that pursues us, that shows us the Father's love, just like the story that Jesus told of the prodigal son. That father was waiting, he was watching, he was looking for his son to return. And when he saw him off in the distance, he didn't just stand there and wait, he ran. So God, remind us when we feel unworthy, remind us when we feel completely broken, remind us that your mercies and your faithfulness and your grace and your goodness, they come running after us. And they are ours for the taking when we turn to you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Go ahead and be seated, and kids, 5th grade and below, can be dismissed to Branch Kids. I tried something different last week, and I sat the whole time, and it was really hard. So I'm like, not going to do that again, at least not this week. I can't stay still. I tell people that's why I'm a pastor, because I couldn't do what some other people do and actually sit still for 45 minutes to an hour on a Sunday. I'm too ADD, I guess. You know, scientists say that at around the age of 2, children begin to notice differences. Not only they notice like visible differences of things, but they also notice like differences between wrong and right. So that's probably why 2-year-olds start saying no, right? You know, around the time that they can talk, they start realizing that difference between wrong and right, and they can analyze their situations a little bit more to understand and to see, hey, what's different here. I don't know at what point they start to be able to figure out that my situation is different than the situation around in other parts of the world. I think part of it's exposure. as children begin to be exposed to different things and different atmospheres, they start making that connection and saying, hey, that's something different than what I have in my little world here. I know that for me, I grew up in the home of a very conservative Baptist minister, and I was not allowed to do a lot of things. There were very many prohibitions in my life at a young age. But I think by the time I turned 13 and then onward 14, 15, I began to start seeing things in a way that I'd never really seen them before. And I noticed that there were differences. One of the big things happened when I walked into the kitchen. I think it was when I was a teenager that I saw this magnet on my mom's refrigerator, and it had this. It said, "Jesus Christ, the real thing." And I'm like, at first I walked past it really quickly, and I'm like, oh, Coca-Cola. My mom likes Coca-Cola. And I was like, wait a minute, hold on a second. That's not Coca-Cola. Like, what is this? Like, and this was like my life growing up. I all of a sudden saw that there were like two worlds that I found myself in. That I found myself in this world that would take like secular things in the world and Christianize them. And I scratched my head a little bit trying to figure out like, what's the deal here? You know, it's been a constant question for God's people since God called them out from among the other nations through Abram, that they've wondered, how do we live in this world as people of God? As people who have a hope beyond this world, how do we live in such a way that we really think about the difference? We don't accentuate it so greatly, but at the same time, we don't completely dismiss it. I think the big question, it seems like the church and God's people have always wrestled with, is how do I live in the world while not being of the world? Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 12. He says, don't be conformed, or don't conform yourself to the patterns of this world. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Jesus, when he was talking to his disciples in John 18, specifically in verse 36, he tells his disciples that the kingdom that he's ushering in is a kingdom that's not of this world. It's different. It's going to look different. The values are different. Everything is different. Much of my own experience was that to be a Christian meant that we needed to not just be different, but to almost like be weird different, okay? I mean, that somehow or another we needed to be the people that when you walked by, everybody looked at you and were like, whispering behind their hands and saying, like, there's something weirdly different about them. And weird isn't always bad, right? Like, how do we keep Ashland weird, right? There's that big campaign for people to do something like that. But how do we find this balance between living in a world that's foreign in some ways to us and foreign to our values, and yet at the same time be able to acclimate to this world around us? What do we do? How do we live? How do we live in such a way that people can see a distinction between who we are and other people? How do we live as people of hope? Because the hope that we find is not hope in anything in this world. It's beyond this world in the person of Jesus Christ. And then once we start answering those questions, how do we engage people in the places where they are to figure out, hey, how do I point you to the hope that I've experienced? How do I let you know that there's something else beyond the hope that you've found here in this world? And today's the last day of this series that we've been over the last few weeks, looking at what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. We've gone through every letter, concluding today. And if you've joined us in person, if you've joined us online, then hopefully you've seen it. Encourage you that if you miss, or if you feel like there was something that you want to hear again, you can go on and listen to the podcast. You can go on our YouTube channel as well and see see the services again, but just as a reminder for all of us, going through that whole word, D stands for dying to self. We're supposed to be dying to self disciples. The first I is for investing in others or with our talent and our time and our resources. S means spirit-led, that we ask the Holy Spirit to lead us and guide us in the places we're supposed to go. C stands for conforming to Christ or imitating God. And then the second I is inviting others, like the woman at the well in John 4, that we invite others to meet Jesus, to see the man who told us everything that we had ever done. P stands for prayerful, that we spend time cultivating the relationship with God through prayer. L stands for learning Jesus' ways. We talked about that last week. We talked about loving as Jesus loved. And then today we look at this idea of engaging the culture around us. You know, when we ask ourselves that question about how do I engage the culture around me, we need to not just ask as individuals, but we need to ask as a larger community. Not just here at the branch, but every single local expression of God's church needs to be asking themselves, how are we engaging the culture around us? You know, I appreciate how Alan Roxburgh, who is an author and a scholar, he writes in his book, Reaching a New Generation, he says, our culture does not need any more churches run like corporations. It needs local communities empowered by the gospel vision of a transforming Christ who addresses the needs of the context and changes the polis into a place of hope and wholeness. For anyone who doesn't know, that word polis comes from the Greek for city, okay? So like it's a place thing. And I love what Roxburgh said here. You know, we don't need to just keep churning out like local expressions of God's hands and feet, the church, that are just like throwing stuff out there. We need communities that are about building relationships and seeking to change the place where God has planted us to be places of hope, and then injecting the meaning beyond that of what is the hope that is within us. There's a hope beyond this earth, this world that we point people to. When we come to this idea of how do we engage the culture, I think the other question that we really need to answer for ourselves is, what is culture? Andy Crouch has written a great book called Culture Making, which can get a little deep at times. I just finished my second time through the book this year, and I did it with somebody else because I'm not smart enough to be able to do that by myself. So anyway, it's a good book to wrestle through some of this stuff, but he says that culture is what we make of the world. And that this idea is that we make sense of the world by making something of the world. And so when we're trying to understand the world around us, we create culture. And part of our creation of culture is that we create cultural artifacts. There's an expression of that. And culture is, if we look in the dictionary, it's customs, arts, social institutions, achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social groups. In the 1950s, Richard Niebuhr, who was a professor up at a seminary in New York, wrote a book called Christ and Culture. And he says that culture is the artificial secondary environment which man superimposes on the natural. It comprises language, habits, ideas, beliefs, customs, social organization, inherited artifacts, technical processes, and values. And his book goes into 5 different approaches, which we're not going to get into here, that Christians take to culture. This idea of Christ with culture, Christ of culture, Christ against culture. So again, if you want to do a deeper dive into this idea of culture, I'd recommend that book to you. The Apostle Paul, who was God's instrument in helping to create a lot of the culture of the church early on in the first century, he understood what it meant to go into different cultures and have to meet them where they were. Have to understand, okay, how do I bring the message of Jesus Christ the message of salvation into a culture that in some ways was largely oppositional to what he was trying to do. And one of the greatest examples of Paul really engaging with that is in Acts 17. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to Acts 17. We'll put it up on the screen as well, starting in verse 16. Reading in the New International Version, Paul's here in Athens, and it says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. And so he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day, with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. And some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we'd like to know what they mean. All the Athenians and foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. And Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. And so you're ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. And God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. Though he is not far from any one of us, for in him we live and we move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we're God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. And at that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. Looking at how Paul engaged the culture there in Athens, I think is a good model for us. And we can look at some of the things that he did and borrow those and say, how do we do similarly wherever God has placed us? The first thing I think that we see what Paul is doing is he exhibits what David Fitch calls faithful presence. And in David Fitch's book of the same name, he says, faithful presence names the reality that God is present in the world and that he uses a people faithful to his presence to make himself concrete and real amid the world's struggle and pain. Right out of the gate in this passage, Paul shows something that he shows elsewhere in his letters. But it says that Paul looked around and he was greatly distressed at the fact that he saw idols around the city. You know, Paul had a deep concern. And so the first thing that we can take from Paul is that we need to start with care and concern. We need to start with care and concern for the people around us. You know, and for some of us that might come really easily because we're more compassionate, we're more empathetic people. But for others of us, it may be harder. But each and every one of us cares for something and someone. And so the question is, are we concerned about the things around us? And if we are, what are those things? You know, maybe we look around and we see that as it gets closer to winter, we see kids that don't have adequate shoes and clothes, and that breaks our heart. Maybe it's reading things, in the newspapers about immigrants coming in here and foreigners, and wondering, like, what do they have here? Do they find themselves completely alone and without adequate resources? What are there other things? I had a friend who messaged me the other day saying that this month has been a focus on victims of abuse, and that some people, when they hear about that, whether it's because of their own experience or because of just having a deep empathy, that's the thing that they really say, man, I really care about that. Each of us cares about something. It's just a question of what it is. What is it that when we look at it, when we see it, like Paul, we are deeply distressed in our being? And it's possible that maybe we might be one of those who, nothing really gets us, too agitated. And if we're in that place, then my urgency to you, my request to you would be spend time in prayer and say, God, help me to see the things around me. There's a song that sometimes we sing here at the branch, says, break my heart for what breaks yours. And I think that's a good prayer for us to pray, that when we don't see things that are really stirring our being, that we pray, God, break my heart for the things that break yours. Let me see things the way that you see things, and let me care. One of the verses in Scripture that has really spoken to me a lot in past years is in the book of Ezekiel, where God says to Ezekiel in Ezekiel 36:26, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I'll remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. When I read that verse, I also think about the Grinch who stole Christmas. At the end of that story, right? Like, what does it say? It says that the Grinch's heart grew 3 sizes that day. And I think for some of us, there may be times that God needs to grow our heart 3 times for the things that are happening around us, the things that he's calling us to enter into. And so we need to start with care and concern. And then the second thing that we see Paul do is that he was where the people are. So we need to be where the people are. We see in these verses that Paul was in the synagogue. He was the place where they gathered for worship, but he was also in the marketplace where things were buzzing, where there were people speaking their philosophies, where people would come together to reason and hear things. And so my question is, where are we spending time? It's always the challenge of God's people again to wonder, where do I spend my time? Are we spending time in the places where we can meet people who have yet to know of the hope of Jesus Christ? I think each and every one of us is in some ways doing that. If we go to work, if we go to school, if we hang out in our neighborhood, if we go to the supermarket, if we go to other places, we inevitably encounter people who have yet to know the hope of Jesus Christ. And I'll tell you what, this is one of the biggest struggles for pastors and people who work in the church, because we can get so caught up in spending time within the 4 walls of what we call the church and forget that the church isn't a building, but the church is a people. The church isn't something that's stagnant and stationary. The church is flesh and blood that God said, hey, go and be my church in this world. And so I'm always struggling, trying to find ways to make sure that I'm both here and there at the same time sometimes. And I'm sure others struggle with that as well. Are we engaging people in the places where they are, and how are we wrestling with that tension? And the third thing that we see Paul do is that he's not afraid of them. And I think that's the thing that we need to remind ourselves. Don't be afraid of people who don't see things the way that we see things, who don't embrace Jesus Christ and don't yet know the hope of Jesus Christ. We don't run away from them. We find opportunities, we find inroads. And we don't have to start with Jesus. We can just find some kind of affinity. We can find some kind of commonality and start there in that place. And then when we start with that and are reminded of our own faith, we can start at a point that helps somebody else who has a different perspective. Paul engaged people with difficult conversations in this. And there were some people who didn't want to receive it. They made fun of him. They talked behind their hands about him. Hey, it's going to happen. Jesus told us that would happen. But when we engage with people in conversations that pique their interest, they'll bring us into spaces that we wouldn't get to go into on our own. And I can't even begin to tell you in the space of this time how many times that's happened to me. That I just was in the right place at the right time, and I think God was definitely in the details of that. And because I was in that place, I met somebody who invited me to something else that I never, ever would have been invited into on my own. That God orchestrated that moment in such a way that I would be invited into something. When we pay attention, when we put our fears aside and we're not afraid and we just step into those spaces, God can use us. That's what being faithfully present really means. Our faithful presence in the community, in the spaces where God puts us, where we can encounter people who have yet to know the hope of Jesus Christ. The fourth thing that we see Paul do in verse 22 is that he engages them respectfully. And I'll tell you what, I have seen this not happen more than I'd like to admit in recent years, especially with Christians. Sometimes I feel like Christians can be among the worst at being respectful in engaging people. That we're really quick to point out all the things that are wrong. We're quick to start shaking a finger rather than saying, how do we find commonality here? How do we come to this place and instead of pointing out everything wrong that you're doing, say, hey, I see something different here. In talking to people a few years ago, the phrase that I've used a lot is empathetic curiosity. That we are empathetically curious when we see people and ideas and philosophies that are different from our own. And instead of right away saying, oh, that's wrong, let's step away from it, saying, like, why do you believe that? Like, what has drawn you to that thing? I think we see this. We have an election upcoming, right? And instead of talking about the things that we're for, we always talk about the things that we're against. Just once, I would like to see a complete campaign of a candidate who says, I'm going to tell you everything I'm for, and I'm not going to tell you anything that the other guy's, for, and why we're different in that. Why do we always gravitate towards the things that make us different rather than having a commonality there? Paul acknowledges that in this place. And if we read Paul's other letters, we know that Paul was capable of being snarky, and Paul was capable of saying cutting things. And yet, here in this space, he didn't do that. He said, I notice that you're very religious. I've walked around and I've seen that you even have an altar to an unknown God. Well, let me tell you about that unknown God because I know him. He didn't say, man, you guys are idiots and fools for thinking this. Like, how could you even do that? No. He starts in that place where he says, I see what you're doing. I see what you're looking for. Can we talk about this a little bit more? Back last spring, a friend and I, who have a lot of common interests, we started a podcast together called Between the Frames because both of us love music and movies and shows and stuff. And we wanted to look at some of the things that we're seeing in our culture and say, hey, are there any redeeming values here? Are there any redeeming qualities about some of these things? And so since last spring, we've been doing this podcast together and just having conversations about some of the good things that we see in what culture is bringing. And then saying, hey, if we could go a next step, we see some of these good values, these values that Christians would embrace and say, like, why do we like these values? Why are these values important? Well, let me tell you, because we find hope in Jesus Christ. We talk about cultural things and spiritual things. You know, it's my way of respectfully engaging people and saying, hey, here's a place that we can agree on. Here's a place that we can be common on. How do we go from this place and then dive in a little bit more? And in the upcoming year, I hope that we here at the branch can look at some of those things and say, hey, how do we go about engaging in that way, engaging in some of what the culture puts out? Now, let me say as an aside, there are things that our culture puts out that it is going to be near impossible for us to find anything redemptive about. I'm not going to say that we can look at everything and we're going to say, oh yeah, that there's some things that are just like inherently evil or really bad and immoral, and we need to stay away from those things. So I'm not talking about those things. I'm not saying, hey, let's enter into everything. You know, one of the things we've talked about during this series is using discernment and seeking God's wisdom. So we need to use that in this process. But here's the thing, each and every one of us was created in the image of God. If we go back to the creation account that we see in Genesis, we see that God created man and woman in his own image. And then sin tainted that image. But God made a way for us to move back and start living into the image in which we were created. And we see that incompletely in our culture. I love the way that Ecclesiastes 3:11 puts it, that he has made everything beautiful in its time, and he has also set eternity in the human heart. And I love that picture that Koheleth, the teacher in Ecclesiastes, puts out, this idea of setting eternity in our heart. Each human heart, whether people are pursuing Jesus or not, inside of them is the image of God. Inside of them is eternity in their hearts, and they're seeking it out, they're pursuing it, but they're not always getting there. I think part of the responsibility of the church, part of the responsibility of disciples of Jesus Christ, is to help people say that the eternity in their hearts that they're looking for, that they're trying to complete, can only be found in Jesus Christ. I love Pascal, who was a philosopher, talked about the God-shaped hole that was within us. And I think it's probably pulled from Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11. You know, Andy Crouch, in his book Culture Making, that I referenced earlier, he gives some helpful tools to evaluate things around us. He talks about the fact that in culture, we create these cultural artifacts and that help us define and respond to culture. The cultural artifacts are the results of our human acts of cultivation and creativity. So as we look at cultural artifacts around us, I think there's 5 questions that we can ask ourselves, and these are straight from Andy Crouch's book, Culture Making. The first one is this: what does this cultural artifact assume about the world, the way the world is? As we look at something that the culture does, there are assumptions about what the world is like when we look at this. And then right behind that, the second one is this: what does this cultural artifact assume about the way the world should be? You know, all of us have a bent about what we think things should be like. And so there's the way the world is, and then there's the way that we think it should be. And the third question is, what does this cultural artifact make possible? By putting out a cultural artifact, things are made possible by that. Like all of a sudden, you can do something different than you could do before by this cultural artifact, that's something that's being put out. The fourth one is this. What does this cultural artifact make impossible, or at least very difficult? You think about the fact that each cultural artifact makes something possible and makes something impossible or really hard. Are we answering that question? And then the final one is this. What new forms of culture are created in response to this cultural artifact? What is not just made possible, but what's created out of this as we consider a cultural artifact that has been put out. One of the examples that Crouch uses in his book is like a cultural artifact that is amoral would be like the highway system in our country. What does the highway system in our country make possible? It makes possible the moving of goods from place to place in a fast and expedient way. What does it make impossible? It makes impossible for people to just kind of sit and do nothing anymore because certain goods are provided to people. So looking at something like the highway system, we can say, okay, that's one cultural artifact. What else beyond that are we looking at that the culture around us is offering? Can we find redemptive things within what the culture is offering? And like Paul, affirm them, but also ask questions about them and point the rest of the way to Jesus through the gospel. Can we take these questions that Crouch has given and like Paul go into places around us and see beauty and then point people beyond that? Help them see that God's fingerprints are all around us, that he is the one who created all things, and he created us to be creative. And so how do we see those different creative expressions in the world? I think we can do this, and I would love for us at the branch to be about that, to be about saying, hey, how can we go out into the world and see the beautiful things, but also realize that some of those beautiful things are incomplete because they haven't acknowledged the one who has created us all? And how can we engage people in letting them know that we know that one? We know him who created all things, the one who set eternity in our hearts. And so, what do we do with all this? The first question I think we need to ask ourselves is, how have we been interacting with culture? In some ways I felt like there was more of a fear of the culture, how I grew up, that we're just afraid of it. And if it touched us, it was like some kind of, disease, that it would somehow taint us. How are we interacting with our culture? And the second thing is, can we learn to take a respectful approach to the artifacts around us, those things that we see? Can we respectfully engage them? And then the third isn't a question so much as just an assignment for us to think about this week. Can we look to have a conversation with someone that engages them with some kind of cultural artifact? Maybe there's something that you watch at home and you're not afraid to let other people know that you watch it. And you want to have a conversation about that with someone at work. Maybe it's an article that you read and you say, hey, I'd be curious to know what you think. Where can God use you this week? And you don't have to say, it's not like a Christian song that you measure how many times you say Jesus in it to see if it's really Christian, okay? Like, it's okay if you don't even engage in the idea of who God is and who Jesus is. You got to start somewhere. Let it be not just the one and only conversation. Let it be the start of future conversations as well. And try that this week. Let me pray for us. God, thanks. Thanks for the way that you've placed us here and you've called us out from among others to be different. And yet, God, it's hard for us to do what we do and to hold on to the values of Jesus, and yet also feel like we're living in a world that sometimes opposes that. So God, give us wisdom as we live out this idea of discipleship of Jesus in the world. Show us what it means to engage the culture. And God, may we trust you. May we continue to love and point people to you, knowing that, God, you will orchestrate those conversations. You will put us in those places where we need to be so that we can be your instruments and we can be your faithful presence in this world. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Stand as we just kind of respond to that and know that sometimes our yes feels difficult when we say, God, yes, I want to engage the culture around me, but it's hard to do. The disciples who followed Jesus back then 2,000 years ago, they all knew that it was hard. And their yes, sometimes it probably turned to no. We see that in Peter at times, that he didn't always say yes and mean it. And so can we sing this out? Can we say, yes, I will. I'll lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will. I'll bless your name. Yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy. And all my days, yes, I will. Let's sing this. Count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. Working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Yes, I will. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. Working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will. I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names. And nothing can stand against. I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names. Nothing can stand against. Yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valleys. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will. Yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valleys. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will. Go ahead and have a seat for a minute. I'm going to invite my friend Matt up. And his clan, you can sit, Matt, because I'm not going to make you hold her the whole time. AJ, are you going to come up too, bud? He's like, I don't think so. So I wanted Matt to come up because one of the things we talk about here at the branch is that partnership is key, and people are sick and tired of hearing me talk about that all the time. So I figured that I would let somebody else talk about it. One of the things that we've been talking about here, the branch, is a partnership that we have with Patrick Henry YMCA, and that a few weeks ago we started a tutoring program here on Tuesday nights. And Matt's been one of the ones who has partnered with us and is doing it. I know that Connor is as well. We're grateful for those who have done that. But I wanted you all to hear just a little bit from Matt about tutoring. So Matt, tell me, what was it that drew you to being part of this and being a tutor?
Well, let me first, I guess, just say that Jessie is working today, my wife, and when John asked, I was like, yeah, we'll do it, and completely forgot that Jessie was working today. But it's perfectly fine. They're going to cooperate. Drawn to this, just, we very often try to remind ourselves that we feel very blessed to have the things that we do have, our children, our home, our lives, our friends, and just trying to find something small and doable at first to try to give back in some way. And so it's something that Jessie and I certainly talked about, because while I'm the one going and doing the tutoring, she's the one doing yet another night of bedtime without me at home. So it was just something we decided on together.
Cool. Yeah, so what were some of the things that you're like, I mean, you just mentioned the fact that it was going to be hard on Jessie because you were going to be home, or you weren't going to be home, she was going to have to do bedtime. What were some of the other things that initially when you thought like, I don't know if this is a good idea, like maybe I shouldn't do this?
Well, for my job, one of the things is I have night meetings about 5-6 nights a month, so the time was a little bit of a concern, and that's certainly why I checked with Jessie. Otherwise, just, and I think I joked with you about it and several others, my 2 children are under 3, so they're not in elementary school right now, and it's been 30+ years since I was in elementary school. So, just that simple kind of silly hesitation, like, I will be able to do this. And I'll share a funny story on that, the young man that I'm working with, we sat down and I said, what do you want to work on? He says, I don't know. I said, well, how about math? I was good at math I really was. I was very good at math. And then we went to do long division. And I had to pull it up on Google to remind myself how to do long division. So, the hesitation is this, am I the right one? Am I good enough for this? All those things. They're not silly, but you do just kind of have to put yourself in there and see that it comes through.
Yeah. So we're 3 weeks in. This week will be 4th week. And in that short time, I know because I've been here too, that we've seen some cool things in how God is working. Can you think about one thing or a few things of how you've seen God work in this time already of tutoring?
Certainly. So the first week, we didn't have that many kids show up, and I actually went on home early. But that didn't surprise me. Anything you get started, you kind of have to let people see you're going to keep showing up and you're going to be there. And I know the numbers have grown each week. So the other really cool thing that happened this week, and just quick backstory, I dairy farmed for 20 years after college. Don't spit up when I say that. We did sell the cows and no longer dairy farm. And so the way I think of it is, when I'm in a room of all farmers, I'm very hesitant to still call myself a farmer, because I'm not the one out there doing that work like they are. But in general, I'm still very much a farmer. It's always a part of me. It's what I grew up with. And so we're sitting there finishing up this week, and the young man, after I got better at long division and worked through some of the equations, I said to him, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, a farmer. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Why do we waste all this time on math? Our time is up, but we're going to talk more about farming next week. I told you, I instantly pulled my phone. I was like, I got to show you pictures of cows. Well, we sold the cows 2.5 years ago. So I thought, I know I can find pictures. Facebook. So I'm sitting there scrolling Facebook to get back like 2+ years, occasionally coming across a cow photo. But look, see, I'm really a farmer. See, I have pictures of cows on my phone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll tell you from my perspective, on Tuesday night, I was so excited when I saw how excited you were about that, Matt, because I think that's one of the things that, and I think it's a God thing, that when we step into these places, they're uncomfortable for us. We feel like, yeah, we got to Google long division and other things. But it's amazing how God uses those places. I mean, the fact that he would pair you together with a kid who says, hey, I want to be a farmer. And just seeing, Matt was like a little kid to me on Tuesday night, because he's like, oh man, I could bring him out to the farm. I could do this. And like all of a sudden I saw the wheels in his head turning, and I thought, wow, I didn't do this. Matt didn't do this. The woman who is with the Y in our partnership, she wasn't the one who, let me see how I can pair these. God was the one who did it. And it's so cool to see those kinds of things. And I think, we're going to try more and more, as I encounter stories like Matt's, to have people other than me come up and talk about it. Because I think that's the thing that makes a huge difference, is when people see that God is working in the spaces where we inhabit, in our faithful presence, just being there. So thanks for doing what you do, and thanks for being willing to share too.
Thank you. I don't feel like I deserve thanks. It's just, it's one very small thing. Just trying to give back in a little way.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Well, like I say, partnership is key. We're excited. We've got actually an opportunity to, this is inevitable that it's a little bit, my wife isn't working. She is working. She's mothering today. She had to go off as well and be with our youngest. But it's a little bit easier, to get 2 teenagers out in the morning. But I don't know, it may be as much of a challenge. But I just 10 minutes before the service started this morning, I got I started getting texts from my friend Teresa in the community, and they're going to be doing something tomorrow evening at 4 in the community. And she told me that one of the things that they're going to need is candy to be distributing to the kids who are going to be showing up to this event. So if by chance tonight you are at home and afterwards you have an excess of candy, feel free to come by the branch tomorrow and bring it, or contact us and say, hey, can you get it or whatever, so that I can bring it tomorrow evening. And if you ration out candy and you don't let your kids eat everything they bring, you can bring that too. And tomorrow, if you go to all the stores, the candy will be reduced as well. So if you don't have excess and you want to help us in that, in supporting our community with this event, Teresa sent me pictures of the shirts that everyone's going to be wearing, and I was totally psyched to see it, because it says, Yo soy la luz del mundo, which in Spanish means I am the light of the world. And so it's a Jesus-focused event that our Hispanic community is going to be celebrating tomorrow, and we can support them in that. So you can talk to me afterwards, or if you're watching this after the fact, shoot an email at thebranchashland@gmail.com, and would love to have others partner with us in this as well. We're always going to have opportunities to partner. We're grateful for that. I am so grateful for people like Matt, like Connor, like others who have said, hey, we want to be part of this partnership in our community. There are ways you can partner in prayer, partner in giving. We'll put that up on the screen as well if you want to partner with us in giving as well. Thank you. And please, I hope people don't ever feel like it's just I'm partnering with John or I'm partnering with the branch, because I hope that the things that we're doing here feel like kingdom stuff, that we feel like we're partnering together, not in John's work or the branch's work, but we're partnering in God's work here in Ashland and beyond. So, and like Matt, I think about that. That's the thing that keeps me going on dark days, is reminding myself that God's allowed me to partner with him to be part of this work in this place at this time in this community. What a privilege it is for us to do that. And so why don't we stand as we get ready to go out and be the hands and feet of Jesus in this world, remembering and being reminded that God calls us to be faithfully present in the places where he sends us, in all the places he has us throughout the week. And so as we go, may we go with the authority of God the Father. May we go with the power of God the Holy Spirit. May we go in the name of God the Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.